She dumped 220 ducklings into the flooded rice paddy an hour before sunrise, and Bak Tu, walking his water buffalo down the levee, stopped to laugh so hard he had to lean on the animal's neck. It was March 2019. If you've ever inherited land nobody believed in, drop a comment with the crop you're fighting for and where you're watching from, then hit like and subscribe before the ducks prove everyone wrong. Mai Tran was 29. She had a scar on her left thumb from a rice cutter blade at 14, a motorbike with a cracked mirror, and 3.4 hectares of paddy in An Phu district that had belonged to her grandfather, Ong Sao, until a stroke folded him into the hospital bed, where he died in October 2017. She had the deed. She had his leather notebook, spine cracked, corners gone soft as cloth, pages full of water levels and moon dates, and one line written 7 times in different years: feed the field before you feed yourself. She had $410 in a passbook account and a contract offer from Halden Pacific Agritech sitting unsigned on her kitchen table for 6 weeks, its staple starting to rust from the humidity. The house itself told part of the story nobody in An Phu bothered to say out loud anymore. Ong Sao had built the second room himself the year Mai turned 9, mixing cement by hand because he wouldn't pay a mason to do work he could do slower and cheaper alone, and the wall still carried a crooked line where the mix had run thin halfway across. He'd hung a single calendar on that wall every year without fail, not for the dates printed on it, but for the blank backs of each month's page, which he filled with tide heights and snail counts in handwriting that got smaller as his eyesight got worse. Mai had thrown out 11 years of those calendars after the funeral, not knowing yet what they were, and only realized the mistake when she found, in the tin with the notebook, a single loose page from a 12th year he must have kept separately on purpose. Flood height notes from the worst year on record. The year the co-op ledger she assumed proved his failure was actually the year half the district lost its whole crop, and he'd lost less than anyone. Nathaniel Halden had visited the paddy once, in January, wearing white leather sneakers that sank 2 inches into the mud at the first step off the levee path. He did not apologize for the mud. He held a tablet in a waterproof case and read numbers off it without looking up. $60,000 for a 5-year lease. Guaranteed. His company's hybrid rice strain, his company's pesticide package, his company's harvest crew. Your grandfather ran this at a loss for a decade, he said. I looked at the co-op ledgers. You're sitting on dead weight with sentimental value. He left without shaking her hand, because his own hand was already wiping mud off his sneaker with a tissue from his pocket. By that January, Halden Pacific Agritech had already leased 19 paddies across the commune and was negotiating 11 more, each contract the same template with a different acreage figure typed into the same blank. The company's regional office kept a wall map in Long Shuyen with the leased plots shaded green, and a company newsletter Mai found once, blown against her gate by a storm, described the unleased holdouts as legacy inefficiencies awaiting conversion. She hadn't understood, reading it, that the word meant her. 3 loops opened that same week, though Mai didn't count them that way. The first, Halden Pacific, was buying up leases across An Phu, paddy by paddy, and the district agricultural office had started sending an extension officer, Dr. Phuc Lam, to every commune meeting to recite yield statistics in favor of the company's hybrid strain, statistics that never mentioned the pesticide runoff complaints from the Canal 3 communes over. The second, Bak Tu, who had farmed beside Ong Sao for 31 years and eaten at his table more times than either man could count, told the tea shop that Mai's grandfather had gone soft in his last years, planting duck nonsense instead of proper agriculture, and that the granddaughter was finishing the old man's decline. The third, in the back of the notebook, under a pressed and browned lotus leaf, Ong Sao had drawn a rough sketch of paddy dikes with small enclosures built into the corners, and beside it, dated 11 years back, one sentence: "The ducks eat what the poison cannot reach." Mai's parents had died in a boat accident on the Haun River when she was 6, and Ong Sao raised her in a 2-room house with a tin roof that screamed during storms. He never told her he loved her. He told her which snails were parasites and which were food, which frogs meant the water was clean, which direction the swallows flew before a typhoon. He kept the same 3 water buffalo for 18 years and named none of them. When she turned 18 and left for a factory job in Long Shuyen, sewing collars onto shirts for 11 hours a day, he did not ask her to stay. When she came back for his funeral 19 months later, the Paddy was fallow, the pump motor seized, and the notebook was in a plastic bag inside a rice tin, exactly where he'd told a neighbor, weeks before he died, that it would be. She read the notebook in the hospital waiting room the night he died, and again on the bus back to Anfu, and a third time sitting alone in the dark house with the tin roof ticking as it cooled. Most of it was almanac, rainfall by year, which fields flooded first, when the golden apple snails hatched, when the brown planthoppers came in on the wind from the north, in numbers thick enough to sound like static on the crop. But threaded through the almanac, every few pages, were the duck lines. Buy ducklings before Tet. Move the flock at dawn, not dusk. Let them work the water 2 weeks before transplanting, then again after. Never let them clear a field completely. Leave enough that they come back hungry. She hadn't understood any of it until Halden's tablet caught the light on his 4th sentence about dead weight, and something in her went cold and specific, the way water goes still right before it starts to move. She signed nothing. She told Halden she needed time. He told her the offer expired in 60 days, and that no other Paddy in the commune had refused him past the 2nd visit. He said this like a fact about weather, not a threat, which was somehow worse. Julia Reyes, the young regional manager Halden had installed to handle holdouts, called Mai's phone 11 times over the following month, always polite, always ending the call by mentioning a number slightly higher than the last one, as though Mai's hesitation were a negotiating tactic instead of a grandfather's handwriting she was trying to read correctly for the first time in her life. What was she actually protecting, and did she even know yet? Mai spent that month walking the dikes with the notebook open against her forearm, matching sketches to the mud underfoot, and she found the old duck enclosures exactly where the drawing said they'd be, sunk under 2 years of weed growth, bamboo frames rotted but the post holes still there, packed hard, waiting. She dug 7 of them out with a machete and her own hands, blistered them raw, wrapped them in strips torn from an old shirt, and kept digging. At the district market she asked the poultry seller about a breed called Kosan, small, dark-feathered, bred in the Delta for exactly this work, and the seller laughed the same laugh Bach 2 had used, and said no one bought them anymore. Everyone used chemical spray now. It was faster. She bought 220 ducklings anyway at 11,000 dong apiece, which came to just under $100, more than a fifth of everything she had, and carried them home in 4 rice sacks with the tops folded loose so they could breathe, the whole ride shaking with a sound like wet paper tearing over and over. The poultry seller's laugh had a second half he didn't say out loud, but Mai heard anyway, in the way he counted her money twice before handing over the sacks. The half that assumed she'd be back within the month, asking to sell the birds off cheap, defeated, out $100 and a season's worth of pride. She didn't give him the chance to be right. She built the enclosures at night after finishing the day's dike repairs, working by a headlamp with a battery she rationed to 2 hours, splicing new bamboo into the old post holes, weaving fresh lashings where Ong Sao's had rotted through. Her hands blistered, then calloused, then blistered again in new places the old calluses hadn't covered. She fed the ducklings a starter mash for the first 10 days exactly as the notebook specified, counting them each morning against the number from the night before, losing 6 to a stray dog in the 2nd week, and rebuilding the enclosure fencing lower and tighter the same afternoon, no time spent mourning what was already gone. The brown planthopper came early that year, in the 2nd week after transplanting, riding a warm front down from the north the way the notebook said it would, and it hit Halden's demonstration paddy first, a showcase field 3 plots down, planted with the company hybrid strain, sprayed on the company schedule, photographed twice a month for a regional agriculture bulletin. Mai's ducks were already loose in her own paddy by then, working the water the way the notebook described, clearing snails and larvae along the stems where the birds could reach, but the spray drones couldn't, because spray drifts on wind and settles on leaf tops, while planthoppers breed low in the stem base. In the wet dark the ducks were built to walk through. Dr. Phuc Lam held a commune meeting under the community hall's tin roof in the 4th week, projector cable duct taped to the floor, slides listing national yield averages for hybrid rice against a category he labeled traditional informal methods, a category with no numbers in it at all, just a dash. He looked directly at Mai when he said the phrase, "Informal methods are a nostalgia tax farmers can't afford," and half the room turned to look at her too, and she said nothing, because the ducks were still working and there was nothing yet to show. Bok too brought his complaint about noise, quacking at dawn, he said, disturbing his sleep, though his house sat 400 meters off and everyone in the room knew it, to the same meeting, and got a laugh from 3 tables, and Mai still said nothing, though her jaw held tight enough that a headache sat behind her left eye for 2 days after. Bok too's complaint didn't stop at the meeting. He mentioned it again at the tea shop, and again to the commune chief in passing, twice, until the chief finally walked out to Mai's paddy himself one morning, more out of duty than concern, and stood at the dike for the length of a cigarette, watching 214 ducks work the stem line in near total silence, the only sound the soft slap of water and the occasional low murmur that didn't carry past the nearest field. He didn't apologize to Mai for making the walk, he simply didn't file the complaint forward, which in Anfu counted as the same thing. Kiet, 17, the son of the poultry seller who'd laughed at her, showed up at her gate on a Tuesday morning, asking if she needed help moving the flock, because his father needed the money brought in, but wouldn't say why he was sending his son to the woman everyone was mocking. Mai gave him a bamboo pole and showed him how to walk the ducks along the dike edge without scattering them, patient the way Ong Sao had once been patient with her, and Kiet came back the next morning without being asked. He came back the morning after that too, and the one after, until by the 5th week nobody in his family called it charity anymore, not even his father, who started sending extra feed home with him without comment. Kiet asked Mai once why the ducks were only let onto each section for a set number of days before being moved on, and she read him the line from the notebook. Never let them clear a field completely, leave enough that they come back hungry, and watch something shift in his face, the specific look of a person encountering a rule that sounds like superstition, until the moment it sounds like the only sane way to run a farm. If you've ever watched something old get laughed at right before it works, you already know what a silence sounds like when it starts to change shape. Subscribe now, because that silence is coming in the next scene, and it does not stay quiet for long. By the 6th week, the plant hopper outbreak had gone regional, confirmed by the Provincial Agriculture Department as the worst infestation in 9 years, and Halden's demonstration paddy, sprayed, hybrid, photographed, was a flat brown field of collapsed stems, the rice equivalent of a building with its foundation eaten out. 2 adjoining leased plots went the same way within days. The company's own pesticide, applied on schedule, had done what pesticide always does against an insect that's been sprayed for 3 generations. It had bred resistance faster than it had killed anything. Julia Reyes stopped calling for 11 days. The provincial bulletin that flagged the outbreak ran a photograph of the demonstration field on its front page. Stems collapsed in the flattened, whorled pattern locals called hopper burn, a word that had gone out of common use in Anfu for almost a decade, because spray schedules had kept it rare. Farmers who hadn't seen hopper burn in their own fields since childhood drove out along the provincial road just to look at it, the way people slow down for a wreck, and more than one of them stopped afterward at the edge of Mai's paddy on the way home, not to speak to her, just to look at the difference standing green 30 meters off. Bok too's field, sprayed the traditional way with a knapsack tank, fared only slightly better than Halden's, losing close to 40% of its stand, and he stood at the edge of it one evening not laughing, just standing, in a way Mai recognized from watching men stand at the edge of things they didn't yet know how to talk about. Mai's paddy lost 8%. The ducks had kept the planthopper population low enough, long enough, that when the outbreak wave hit, there was less for it to catch fire on. Kiet counted the stems with her in the 9th week, both of them on their knees in the mud, comparing a sample square from her field against one Halden's foreman let them cut from the ruined demonstration plot for a newspaper reporter who'd started asking questions after the provincial bulletin flagged the outbreak as unusually severe. The reporter, a woman named Hoa from a Can Tho agricultural paper, took photographs of both squares side by side and asked Mai for a quote, and Mai said only, My grandfather told the ducks what to do. I just carried the sacks. Dr. Fook Lamb did not attend the follow-up commune meeting where the district livestock officer confirmed, reading off a laminated card, that Mai's yield loss was the lowest recorded in the flood-prone Eastern Bloc that season. He sent a written note instead, citing a need for controlled replication before drawing conclusions, and the note was read aloud by the commune chief, in a flat voice that made 3 people in the back row laugh, in a way that had nothing to do with Mai this time. That night, alone, mosquito coil burning down to ash on the windowsill, Mai reread the line about feeding the field before feeding yourself, and did not know, for the first time since the funeral, whether she'd done this for the Paddy, or to prove something to a dead man who had never once told her she'd done anything right. She thought about the factory job in Long Shuyen, the 11-hour shifts, the caller after caller after caller, and how easy it would have been to let Halden's $60,000 close over the whole question. Then she found, tucked into the back cover of the notebook, a folded page she hadn't unfolded before, a letter, unsent, dated the year she left for the factory, that said only, "She thinks I never watched her leave. I watched. The Paddy will still be here when she's ready to be watched staying." She read it 3 times, sitting on the floor with her back against the crooked cement wall, and did not cry, because Ong Sao had never once cried in front of her, and something in the reading felt like it required matching him. She thought about the 12 years of calendars she'd thrown away, the tide heights and snail counts she'd mistaken for a dying man's clutter, and understood, with the specific, late clarity of grief that arrives on its own schedule, that the notebook wasn't instructions. It was the only version of a conversation he'd known how to have. She folded the letter back along its original creases, and did not tell Kiet or anyone else it existed. Some things, the notebook had taught her without saying so, were meant to be kept rather than spent. Halden Pacific's regional buyers, 3 of them, flew in from Ho Chi Minh City in the 11th week, for an emergency review after 2 export shipments of the company's hybrid rice were flagged at the Cat Lai port for pesticide residue levels above the threshold set by a new European import regulation that had taken effect that spring, a regulation Halden's compliance team had apparently not updated their spray protocol against. The flagged shipments meant a canceled contract worth $400,000 and a public notice from the importer that named the supplying region by district, and Pie Shu's name, printed in a trade bulletin, next to the word rejected. The rejection landed on the same week the Provincial Agriculture Office released its own residue testing on Mai's harvest, requested almost as an afterthought by HOA's editor to round out the newspaper story, and it came back clean enough to qualify for a European organic import certification Mai hadn't even known existed until the lab technician read her the classification code over the phone. Julia Reyes, when she finally called again, no longer mentioned a number first. She asked, instead, what Mai had used instead of spray, and wrote the answer down like it mattered. Nathaniel Halden came back to Mai's Paddy in the 13th week, in the same white sneakers, though this time he stopped at the edge of the levee and did not step into the mud at all. Julia Reyes stood a pace behind him holding a folder. He said the company was restructuring its regional sourcing strategy, and that he'd like to discuss a pesticide-free certification pathway using Mai's method as the pilot model, with her name and her grandfather's method credited in the marketing materials, and a new contract figure that was nearly double the first offer. He did not apologize for the mud comment from January. He did not apologize for anything. He said, instead, in the same flat reading numbers voice, "Your grandfather's approach appears to have been ahead of the market." The final public meeting happened at the district agriculture office in the 16th week, folding chairs set out for a room that filled past its chairs, Hoa the reporter in the second row with a photographer beside her, the provincial livestock officer at the front table beside Dr. Fook Lam, who had been asked, not entirely voluntarily, to present the season's comparative yield data. He read the numbers in the same voice he'd used to dismiss her 4 months earlier. Lowest loss rate in the Eastern Bloc, replicable across the region's smaller paddies, cost per hectare a fraction of the chemical program even accounting for duckling purchase and enclosure repair. And when he reached the end of the slide, he said, without meeting Mai's eyes, that further study was recommended, though early results are notable. Halden stood when the floor opened, and in front of the room, in front of Bak Tu seated near the back, in front of Julia Reyes and the buyers from Ho Chi Minh City, he said the Paddy method wasn't nostalgia after all, it was resilient infrastructure, and asked Mai, publicly, what terms she wanted for the pilot program to expand across 4 communes. Mai stood at the front of the room with the leather notebook in her hand, not open, just held, and said she wanted 3 things: her name and her grandfather's on any published method, a guaranteed minimum price for participating farmers, regardless of market swings, and Kiet's father's poultry stall, listed as the region's exclusive duckling supplier for the first 2 years. She did not raise her voice. She did not thank anyone. Halden looked at Julia Reyes, who nodded once and said, agreed, in the same flat tone he'd used to call her land deadweight 7 months earlier, except now the words came out of him instead of at her. Dr. Phuc Lam approached her too, near the door, folder of slides still under his arm, and said the district office would like to formally partner on data collection for the expansion, phrasing it as though the idea had been his all along. Mai said the data was already collected, in a notebook, by a man who never needed a projector to prove anything, and left him standing with the folder while she answered a question from Ho's photographer about where to stand for the group photograph. Bak Tu found her outside afterward, by the motorbikes, and didn't apologize either, not directly. He asked, instead, if she'd sell him ducklings for the coming season, and she said the price was the same for everyone, and he nodded, and looked at the ground the way he had at the edge of his ruined field, and that was the end of it between them. No speech, just an order placed. 9 years passed the way seasons do when you stop counting them one at a time, a certification program with Mai's name on the founding document, 41 Paddies converted across 4 communes, a cooperative office with her photograph on the wall, next to a black and white one of Ong Sao that Kiet's mother had found and had reprinted without being asked. Dr. Phuc Lam left the extension office for a private consultancy 2 years after the meeting, and once, at a regional conference, cited the duck-rice integrated model, without mentioning where he'd first seen it dismissed. Julia Reyes left Halden Pacific to start her own sourcing consultancy, and sent Mai a TET card most years. Halden himself Mai saw only twice more, both times in meetings where he no longer wore white shoes to the paddy. Kiet, 26 now, ran the cooperative's field operations and had a habit of writing water levels in a notebook of his own, a cheap spiral one he'd started keeping the week the plant hoppers first hit, because Mai had told him once that a record only means something if you keep it before you need it. His father's poultry stall had grown into a proper hatchery by the 4th year, Khosan ducklings shipped by the 1,000 to 3 neighboring provinces, and the old man had stopped laughing at anything involving Mai's name a long time ago. His younger cousin, Bao, 14, followed him around the dikes most mornings before school, asking questions about which frogs meant clean water, and Mai watched the 2 of them from the levee path some evenings the way she imagined, now, that Ong Sao must have watched her. The 2-room house still had the crooked cement line in the second wall, though Mai had long since fixed the roof so it no longer screamed in storms. She kept the calendar tradition going, one hung each January, front dates ignored, backs filled with tide heights and snail counts in handwriting that hadn't started shrinking yet. She didn't know if Bao would ever need those pages the way she'd needed her grandfather's, but she wrote them anyway, on the theory Ong Sao seemed to have worked from without ever explaining it, that the record was the point, not the reader. She gave Bao the original leather notebook on a Sunday in April, the cover soft as cloth, the pressed lotus leaf still tucked at the back over the unsent letter, and she didn't explain most of it, the way nothing had ever been explained to her either. She only said one thing, standing at the edge of the water where the ducks were working the stem line at dawn, the same hour she'd once stood laughed at. He never told me any of this meant he loved me. Took me a decade of feeding a field to figure out that was the telling. Bao asked her, notebook open already to the first page, how long it takes to know if patience like that actually pays off, and Mai was still working out the honest answer to that when the district's new provincial rice board called her name for the season's opening ceremony 3 fields over, and whatever she said next to the girl standing beside her in the mud, you won't hear it here, because that's a story for the next video, and if you've made it this far into a woman's whole decade of proving people wrong, You already know exactly what to do before you go. Hit subscribe.